All right, we're back. Part 2 of Pravir Malik. If you're a new listener to this show, this is not as deep as we have ever gone before. These last couple episodes and the forthcoming ones over the next weeks are really digging more into the philosophy behind AI, behind physics, behind the quantum realms, behind reality even itself, behind computing and the future of human technology. You're going to start hearing a lot of phraseology around augmentation. The experts that I'm talking to right now are deeply thinking about how we augment humanity with machines. Now, we used to call that wearables. We used to call it a lot of different things. But I think what we're going to learn over the coming months and years is that augmented human beings are where the future is. Human beings that use technology in conjunction and that train individual technologies to work along with them throughout their entire life. We'll get into that a little bit more in the coming weeks. But for this episode, I really want you to sit back, think deeply about what Pravir is saying. It's controversial. Some scientists that are going to listen to this are going to call me and not be really excited about some of the ideas that are presented in these episodes. That's okay. They're ideas. They're nothing to be afraid of. We all need to explore different ideas and different perspectives on the universe. And I think Pravir has a unique perspective that I've never heard before. 22 books this man has authored about this topic. And it is fascinating. It's interesting. The origin of light, the origin of our universe. We get into talking about subatomic particles, quarks, reality, the creation of the universe. And I think there's a lot more here with Pravir, and he and I have spoken since, and he's like, I want to come back. So please give me your feedback on this. And I'd love to hear questions that you have that we can share with Pravir and get his very incredibly interesting perspective on the world that we live in. All right, here we go. Part 2, Pravir Malik. AI. Tell me a little bit about what your thoughts are on the AI that we're seeing right now and how that works and where we're going with it.
Sure. So essentially, if I boil it down to what AI is, in some sense, it's an output of human intelligence.
Yes.
Because we have certain abilities, like for example, memory or ability to manipulate logic, or our ability to operate in certain conceptual spaces. And at the very best, what AI is, it's a replication of that, just done at an order of magnitude increase in computing power, which gives it its extraordinary kind of look and feel that we see in applications that are emerging today, right? Yeah. But it's an output of human intelligence. It can't be anything else. That's what it is. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is something that people misunderstand. And I think it's one of the reasons when ChatGPT came on the scene back in December, I had a female executive friend of mine try it to do some copywriting. And she said, wow, it's really sexist and racist. And I said, no, it's not really sexist and racist. We're really sexist and racist. Yeah. That's the reason that the output looks that way. Yeah. And then I showed her how to ask it to speak from a feminine perspective and to add an IQ prompt in there and do some other things to get different results. But it is true. It's not actually artificial intelligence right now. It's actual intelligence. It's the sum of human knowledge expressed by a machine.
Yes. And so there's a very deep connection to quantum, and if you don't mind, I want to go there.
Please.
Yeah. So essentially, if we go through that, if I just quickly recall that trajectory that we went through earlier,
yes,
and we can see that, for example, if we assume that we've got this quantum level, which is something mysterious, we barely understand it, and then we know that there's definite outputs of that quantum level. We've seen quantum particles emerge. We've seen quantum particles come together and create atoms. We see atoms come together to create molecules. Molecules come together to create molecular plans and cells. Cells come together and create different tissue. Tissue comes together and creates different living species, plants, animals, humans, and so on. So in some way, we can say that there's some kind of native intelligence at the quantum level. So what I want to propose is that there's native intelligence that seeks to embody itself in progressively more complex form so that it can begin to operate in the world in a more complex manner. So we see an atom that has a very, in a sense, simple operation, right? I mean, so if you've got an atomic number of 47, you're destined to always act the same way. You're going to act like silver no matter what. Okay, so you have a certain way in which you are going to operate in the world. Now, if you bring together a bunch of atoms together into molecules, and all of a sudden you got something like a protein, and now you're acting in a much more complex way, but it's the same intelligence that existed at the quantum level that is now, in a sense, pushed forward this form that can capture more of what it is in its native level. And then subsequently, you've got humans that also are embodying something from this quantum intelligence, but in a much, much more sophisticated way, and there's a lot more complexity. And so overall, the human has a huge kind of leap from any kind of molecular plans or atoms in their mode of operation. Now, if you look at AI is not emerging from the quantum levels, it's emerging from the human level. So there's a disconnect between the quantum level, what I'm saying is the source of all intelligence,
Yes,
and AI, which is just generated from human intelligence. So if we want to get to the next level of intelligence, we don't go to AI. We got to go back to the quantum level because that's where everything is coming from, right?
I love where you're going with this. Let me ask it's funny. We talked about limbic resonance a little earlier and how human beings' limbic system will synchronize when they're in small groups. I mean, essentially what I was thinking about as you were talking is that, this knowledge that is intrinsic in a quark that just keeps going into a larger and larger form. In some senses, it is that resonance, right? It is all of these things forming into more and more complex systems, and evolving in that direction. I guess the big question, right? There's two. I mean, I'd love to talk a little bit more about AI and a theory that I have that I think is very controversial as well. But I mean, where does that initial knowledge come from, or is it just based because infinity is infinity, it was going to happen? I think that is an interesting question, and maybe it's a way too philosophical for anybody that's on this call right now. But I'd love your opinion on that, at least, of where does that first nugget of knowledge at the quark level come from?
Yes, and you said it. So essentially, when you talk about the quantum level, and that's, to me, that's a place of infinity.
Yeah, it's just a result of infinity. Yeah, it has to happen.
And so there's all kinds of possibility that lives in there that animates the quantum level, but that's in a sense non-material. It's subtle. It's subtle energy, and once the experiment of materialization began, there's no way but to make these material forms more and more complex, so that they can house more of the possibility that exists at the quantum level. The infinity of intelligence that exists at the quantum level seeks always more complex form by which to express itself materially. And so, currently we've reached the human level, and we can say, as if you look at the different interpretations of singularity and where AI is going to go, whether you look at kind of network theory or different neural lace theories or just AI robotics theories or whatever it is, I come back to this point. It's not tapping into quantum intelligence. It's not going to the source of intelligence, but it's being driven off the human intelligence, and therefore it is fundamentally going to hit a dead end, because human intelligence will be overtaken by some other intelligence that emerges from the quantum levels. Now, that's not to say, I mean, if we practice certain things, then in a sense, I mean, this is, really going off the boundary here, but
yeah, it's okay. But I'm about ready to go one step further, so please feel free.
All right. So, there's no reason why the way that we think and the way we use logic and reason and our limbic systems, there's no reason why that's the ultimate of what intelligence is, or what possibility, or what consciousness is. So, I can use a different word, that there's a different kind of consciousness at the quantum level. And then if we open ourselves in a certain way to this quantum level, then something else can emerge. It can, in fact.
I love that. I think that's really fascinating. So I'm going to throw out my crazy theory here. Yeah. I've never heard anybody talk about this before, but just recently I wrote this down and I thought, well, I'll probably, thank God we're not in ancient Greece, or, somebody told me, but I was curious about this concept. And the concept is that, how we have evolved as humans is based upon mutations, right? Mutations that become more and more beneficial to us. And it is true that also in computer code, that if you copy and paste computer code enough times, you will get something, right, that might not be exact. So I started wondering if at the point where we hit some sort of singularity, does a super intelligent AI actually start to copy itself and look for mutations so that it can follow the same pattern of evolution, but just doing it at a speed that is so quick that we wouldn't even recognize it. It would just overnight emerge as something much, much greater, because it does have the human knowledge. I talked to somebody recently that said, if we had an AGI and we sent it in a small package to Mars, it potentially could colonize the whole planet and create iron, and it could make tools. It could do all these things because it has the data set of how we did it. It would just do it at a much faster pace. If you have the instruction manual, it's much easier to get to the destination, particularly when it comes to IKEA furniture. But that's another one. But do you understand my principle there? I do. Yeah. Could a quantum, doesn't even have to be quantum, but could an AI essentially start to mutate itself in order to learn how to make itself better without potentially human knowledge involved?
Right. Yeah. So here's my kind of point of view on this is that no matter what, no matter how much it mutates, but so long as the origin remains human intelligence, or basically human knowledge, it's never going to be able to exceed that. It can't. For it to exceed that, it has to go back to the quantum levels, right? I mean, that's
it has to. It's got to go back to the source code, right?
It has to go back to the source.
It can't just make copies of copies of. I mean, there's a whole movie about that, Idiocracy, where you just keep making copies and copies, and they get dumber and dumber. I think that's a really valid point. It's possible that AGI could do that, but it'll still run into some limitation because the core data set is not the original data set that came about at the quark level. That is so fascinating to me. Yeah. I'm so glad we talked about it. I don't know if at this point anybody will still be listening. If you are, there's probably a half a dozen people out there that are into psychedelics that are like, this is very interesting. Yeah. But I really appreciate that perspective, because I do think we've got to start thinking very deeply. And I think critical thinking is one of those things that we don't do enough of. We don't do enough deep thinking and exploring theorems and saying, what if it's something different? Yes. And speaking of that, maybe let's start to pivot a little bit to your concept with cosmology and light, because I think we've covered the topics pretty well, at least at a high level. I feel like we could go 5 or 6 levels deeper, but I mean, that's a little difficult to do, but let's maybe start to make that pivot, right? So we've got, do you believe that singularity is a possibility with AI?
Not with AI, but yes, singularity is a possibility.
Yeah, but you believe you've got to go back to the quantum level.
You have to go back to the source, right, in order to really get to the singularity. So to me, so long as the source is human intelligence, which any AI currently is, so no matter how much it mutates, no matter how it extrapolates itself, but it can't step out of the way in which human intelligence operates. Okay.
So could it potentially use fractals to figure some of that out? I mean, could it run?
There's something fundamentally different that I see that exists at the quantum level, and that's where light comes in.
Okay, let's talk about that, because I'm trying to get there from the math. Right. I'm like, well, couldn't it just run a fractal out until what we think is infinity, but maybe find a solution at the bottom of that fractal that we just can't mathematically calculate right now? But I see your point. I mean, I think you've got to get back to the original here. So let's talk about, please, enlighten me. I'm all ears at this point.
Right. So I'll try and do this justice in just a couple of minutes. So the best way to do that might be to just pose a couple of thought experiments.
Okay, please.
Okay, so one thought experiment is that, and which I use often to try and make the point, is that suppose we had a volume. It can be however large we want it to be, and that's the size of the room or the size of the galaxy or the universe, whatever it is. But you have a light source at the center. Now, the distinguishing feature about this light is that it can travel infinitely fast. Okay, so that's the distinguishing feature. It doesn't travel at c. It's not kind of bound by our 186,000 miles per second,
right?
Which is what we understand physical light to be bound at. So this light can travel infinitely fast. Now, because it can travel infinitely fast, it's going to fill up that whole volume instantaneously. So it's going to be omnipresent. Okay. It can travel infinitely fast. So it's going to be all over that volume at the same time. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So is that superluminal? Is that what that would be from a definition perspective?
Yeah. Let me go over so there's four parts to it. So the first part is that it's going to be omnipresent. Second, since everything is now, since that light is everywhere at the same time, everything that exists is going to be in the nature of light.
Sure, because it touches everything simultaneously.
Everything. So there's going to be like a fundamental harmony that exists in that space as well. Okay, so just conceptually here.
Yes, I understand what you mean. Yeah, I got it.
So if anything appears or disappears in that fabric of light, light's going to know about that right away. So it's going to have an instantaneous knowledge of everything. So it's going to be omniscient within that volume as well. Okay, and
I'm following. I got it.
and if anything, not the nature of light arises, it's going to be overpowered by the nature of light. And so light becomes omnipotent within that space as well. So what I'm saying is that if we have light traveling infinitely fast, then the qualities of that light are going to be omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience, and omniharmony. Okay, so there's fourfold properties. Now, when we think about light at a finite speed, and this is all the work I've done in the Cosmology of Light. I've written 10 volumes of books. But essentially what I'm expressing is that there is a mathematical symmetry no matter how slow, fast light goes. Okay, so let's consider that in some space, light, we've glimpsed now its native properties. So these four properties, we can call them presence, power, knowledge, harmony, just to be concise. All right, and they exist. And now when you slow light down to 186,000 miles per second, through a thought experiment, we can see it's the same four properties that just symmetrically shows up differently. So it's the same four properties, but because light's traveling slower, it expresses itself slightly differently. And how does it express itself? So let's take another thought experiment. So you've got light traveling between the sun and the earth. We know it takes 8.5 minutes. Okay, it takes 8.5 minutes to traverse that distance. So, imagine you're on a ray of light and you're halfway between that journey, right? So you're halfway between. So as you look back, you realize that 4 minutes ago, you were at the sun. So the concept of past suddenly becomes apparent. You see that, hey, in 4 minutes, you're going to be at the earth. So the concept of future becomes apparent. And you now got the concept of presence. So you're present now because you're there somewhere in between. But also what becomes apparent is that because light's traveling at a finite speed, that whatever exists at the source or in that light is going to take a finite amount of time to express itself. That's the basis of packets or quanta. All right. So quanta is a packet of energy that expresses itself after a threshold distance or time or level of energy, but that's what quanta is, right? So now we've got this fourfoldness, past, present, future, and matter, quanta being the base of matter
Yeah.
that emerges. But I can make the case that matter is nothing other than a symmetrical face of this presence that exists everywhere when light's traveling infinitely fast. The past is essentially, in a sense, everything that is a result of this tremendous effort. So there's this tremendous presence that, if you look around in this room, we see that everything is the result of a tremendous amount of work. So we can see that there's like this omnipresence that has created it. In the present, there's all kinds of forces. So at this very second, there's a bunch of thoughts and a bunch of emotions that, you and I are both experiencing, but it's the strongest one that'll win out. So that's a symmetrical face of power, because it's the strongest thing that will express itself and determine how we are thinking or perceiving in the moment. And then the future has the inevitability of knowledge built into it. So it's kind of like a symmetrical face of knowledge. So I can make the case that these symmetrically, what we experience when light travels at 186,000 miles per second is no different.
Reality.
Yeah, is no different. But the point being is that we've got quanta, which is a bridge mechanism that is trying to parcel out what exists in this infinity, or this infinite information that we're saying exists when light travels infinitely fast, and it's parceling it out in a way that we can comprehend, or in a way in which its ability can naturally arise through time. So, therefore we see quantum particles emerge first, then we see atoms emerging second, because they can capture more of that complexity. Then we got molecules, and we got molecular plans, you got cells, and more of that infinity is being parceled into materialism through the bridge of quanta. So, this is what
I love it.
this is what quantum theory is. This is what light is. Light essentially is parceling out something of itself at every instant to create the materialism that we exist in a certain way of seeing, right? So,
yeah. So let me ask a couple of questions on that for my own understanding and perspective. Yeah. I mean, I've heard of instances, and I'm not a scientist, of superluminal motion where light is traveling faster than the speed of light, which, I mean, it sounds to me that your theory really is based upon there's an atom of light out there someplace that doesn't apply to these rules. Is that right? That in a different, I don't want to say dimension or realm, but that there is a place or a time or space where that atom of light is not restricted by the speed of light.
Yes, I mean, so I wouldn't call it an atom, but yes, there's
okay,
because atom is a material phenomenon.
That's true. Yeah,
in which light is parceling out something of what it is, so that we can materially see and experience it differently, right? But it's nothing. Sense. It's nothing other than light. An atom is nothing other than a face of light by which we experience light more concretely and in a different way. But really, what we're saying is that in this superluminal reality, as you're calling it, where light's traveling faster, that let's assume for a minute that that's a native state. That really is what reality is.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's being parceled out, and we're experiencing it because we've grown up, and our instrumentation has developed within this confined space. Confined space where light's traveling slower.
Yeah, I mean, technically, if light was traveling just a tiny fraction faster, it doesn't even have to be infinite. It could just be a tiny fraction faster, and the theory would still work, at least from the way that I'm thinking about it, because we would still recognize, I mean, our reality would still be based upon the speed of light where we're at. But it is funny. I actually had heard many, many years ago someone theorize about superluminal motion and the origin of the universe, and said, if there is a God, all it is just an infinitesimally small particle of light, which is both omnipresent and omnipotent and all of those kind of things. I came from a very religious background, and I heard a preacher say this one time, and that is actually what turned me on. I was probably 16 years old, got me interested in science, was this person actually saying, I think we could explain it in this tiny little thing. And I thought, that's pretty fast. I'd never heard that before. So that's why I'm so excited about your theory here, because it goes back to that sort of concept that maybe there's something that we don't see, and it doesn't have to be infinitely large. It could be infinitely small, as long as it is not restricted by the speed of light. It could potentially be everywhere all at once.
Sure.
I think didn't that win an Emmy this last year? That was a great movie that was all about everything everywhere all at once.
Yes.
Now that was talking more about dimensional shifts.
Yes.
But I totally can see where you're coming from this. Do you feel like are you getting some traction on that concept, or is it like most most scientists and artists that it takes a little bit of time, right?
Well, so here's the thing. So, as I said, I wrote kind of 10 volumes of this, and it's a mathematical treatise. It's a mathematical treatise on what light is. Okay, and it took me 10 volumes to express it. But essentially, if we want to try to understand what's happening in the quantum realm, we need a complete model of what might be happening. And so,
sure,
in a sense, this 10-volume book, these 10 volumes that I wrote, is the theory of what's happening at the quantum realm. Now, I can summarize it. I can get very, very practical. There's no reason.
You did a good job here, I have to admit. That was very good.
Yeah, so nobody needs to know about all this theory, right? We're just talking about it.
Yes.
But the way that we can be sure, the way that I'm sure that there's a link there is because, just going back to the key concept, that when we look at how matter and life emerge, we see the imprint of this cosmology of light in the fourfoldness that animates quantum particles, that animates atoms, that animates molecular plans and cells. And there's scientifically, we've already proven that there's 4 categories to each of these. And these 4, you can see how they're in fact the same pattern. And what I'm saying is that this pattern emerges from the infinity of light, but we don't need to go there. All the scientific papers that I've written, I fully go through this model, saying how you need this model to understand what space-time energy gravity is. Space-time energy gravity itself is a fourfold pattern that is the sphere within which all these other fourfold patterns emerge. And so, it all drives back to the cosmology of light. But there's, so, within about the 15 articles that I published, there have been, IEEE articles. There's been a number of best presentation awards, a best paper award. So there's a number of people who are academicians who see some sense in it.
They're brave enough to say they see some sense in it. Let's be honest. Right. It's funny you said this, because I actually had to look it up in my browser. It's been an idea I've had written down for over a year. I was talking with a group about bias and how bias affects our perceptions of things. And one of the researchers said, because I said we have hundreds of biases. He said, we don't have hundreds of biases. We have the wrong model of thinking about bias. And I was like, whoa. That, he's like, we've built this foundation of bias and psychological principles for hundreds of years. And maybe, what if the model's wrong? He's like, we're just going to keep going down the wrong path because the model's wrong. He's like, we have to go back and rethink the model and say, look, Freud and these guys got us someplace. These researchers got us to a point, but at some point we have to throw out everything that they said and try again and see if the theory that we come up with, the knowledge that we have today, is the same theory that they came up with 200 years ago. And his opinion was, it won't be. And I think you've just proven that point, that maybe the theory itself, the model itself, is incorrect, or the interpretation of the model is incorrect, I think, is even more a way to look at it. But this has been really fascinating. I've got to tell you, you're the most interesting person I've ever interviewed. Seriously, I think, at least from the way that my mind thinks and the things that I think about when I'm having a glass of wine out by the fire pit, these are the things I'm thinking about.
Is that right?
And it is. And I think what I like about our conversation, Pravir, is that I think you've given me a perspective on it that is different than anything I've read in the past.
Mhm.
I've started reading some of your stuff here in the last couple of days, and I got excited because it was not. I can see the influence where people have from other things, right?
Yeah.
And I love how that you had a different perspective and different take on things.
Thank you.
If people want to reach out to you and find out more about your work, I've seen that you're a Forbes writer, a Forbes contributor. What's the best way for people to find out more? And lots of Amazon books, right? 22 of those.
Yeah. So I've got a whole bunch of the Amazon stuff that's self-published, about 15 of them. So they're all to do with light, and then there's a bunch that were published by Sage before that. But through LinkedIn, through Facebook, that might be the simplest thing. Is LinkedIn is just to send me a note. I'd be happy to connect and just dialogue in some way. So.
Well, thank you so much. I'd love to have you back again. I think it's going to take me about a month to go through this content and figure out. I've never made. I think I made 9 pages of notes. So that's why I wasn't ignoring you. I'm over here writing stuff down, writing subjectivity is vertical, and I'm like, this was really great. It was a great thought experiment, and I really appreciate you coming onto the show.
Thank you.
Listen, thank you. And for those of you listening, I hope you stuck it out, because there was some really amazing stuff in here. I'm sure we're going to break this up into a couple of parts. But Pravir Malik, Doctor, thank you so much. This was incredible. Appreciate you. Thank you all for joining me. I hope that was as deep for you as it was for me. I don't want to say I've been shook ever since I spoke to Pravir, but I think it has shaken me to my core in my understanding of the universe and what it is that's all around us. I love in this episode, we talk about singularity, and I ask him, is AI singularity possible? And he says straight up, no, it's not going to happen. But it is possible with a different model. A model that looks at the quirks of our universe, gets into the quantum physics of our universe, and figures out how to harvest this deep innate intelligence that is locked inside every atom in this entire thing we call Earth and in the entire reality that we live in today. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Thanks for listening to The Convergence. If you want more information about the topics you've heard here today, reach out to us at theconvergencepodcast.com.